It's Thursday, December 3rd. We're finally in the home stretch of a year unprecedented and unparalleled in any of our lives. Stay patient, my friends. 2020 is almost over. And while I wouldn't dare tempt fate by believing that 2021 couldn't possibly be worse, the good Lord knows it has to be better. And it can be. No, seriously, it can. I believe that. I mean, it has been before. You might want to sit down to hear this, but there was a time not all that long ago when people who disagreed vehemently on issues of politics could sit down and discuss them without hating each other, without demonizing or insulting each other. Yes, really. It may be hard to remember, but in fact, that used to be the standard for TV news broadcasts. Sharing the stage, giving equal time to all sides, discussing it, arguing about it on air, and then signing off and walking away as friends. Folks forget it, but even Sean Hannity, the reigning dean of right-wing media, got his start on Fox News as the equal co-host of Hannity and Colmes, a show he shared for over a decade with a progressive partner, the late Alan Colmes. CNN's Crossfire was the groundbreaker of the genre, equal representation between conservatives and progressives on its panel for almost a quarter of a century, debated issues and disagreed while still being respectful. But sometime in the mid-aughts, the tenor began to change. CNN canceled Crossfire and the equally civil debate program Capital Gang in 2005. Fox gave the entire hour to Hannity in 2008, and many would argue that civil discussion and honest, respectful debate got canceled around the same time. I'm Clay Aiken. This week, Politicon is especially thrilled to talk to one of our own, legendary newsman and commentator Al Hunt. Al has been one of the mainstays of civil debate on TV and radio throughout the past 40 years, most notably as a co-host and panelist of CNN's Capital Gang and Evans, Novak, Hunt, and Shield, two programs that each ran for 20 years on the then highest-rated cable news network. He spent 35 years in the Washington bureau of the Wall Street Journal. And currently, you can hear him weekly on our sister Politicon podcast, Politics War Room with James Carville and Al Hunt, which, by the way, I highly recommend. But here on our show, I'll ask him, what the hell happened to political discourse in America? Is it the fault of the public, the politicians, the media? Will President-elect Biden be able to actually govern with such polarization? And how the heck are we going to get along? Where are you now, Al?
I'm in Washington, where I've been for the last 9 months.
I know, right? We started doing this show with me flying to LA to do it with a panel, and we got through 2 weeks of that. And and then I've been in my house ever since then, not doing anything else. Now, does Judy do the broadcast every night from home also?
From about 25 feet from here, from our library.
That's incredible. I mean, does she prefer it that way? Like, she going to keep doing it that way?
Well,
that would be what I'd want to do.
It started off out of necessity, and I think there are advantages and there are disadvantages. But it's what is, and it's they do a good job of there have been, I think, maybe one technological breakdown the whole time, which has been pretty good.
How do they measure ratings at PBS? I mean, have they seen an uptick there, or?
Well, they certainly, I mean, they measure it they don't measure it the same way or as religiously or fully as the networks do, but they saw a clear uptick in audience. I mean, dramatic uptick when Trump was elected.
Oh, really? After the election?
Yeah, I guess a little bit during, and then really during the administration. I mean, like not quite doubling, but awful close to it.
Wow. Well, the reason I ask is because I have always been an avid, voracious consumer of cable news. And sometime in March, right around the coronavirus, well, probably April, after a few weeks of it, I personally, and I've talked about that on this show a little bit, I personally just kind of got tired of cable news inundating me with so much information. And I looked at some of the broadcast networks and their ratings had gone up so high. And I thought, wait a second, I wonder if there's an argument to be had for any of these broadcast networks, why they would ever need to ever tell me that coronavirus is fine and we can go out again. If the ratings for ABC go up by double, doesn't it benefit them more? And so I stopped watching all news, and the only news I watch every night is PBS. I watch the
Well,
NewsHour every night because I figure, ratings aren't as important there as they are on some of these broadcast networks or cable networks. And do you think ratings have guided the way they talk about coronavirus or politics in general on any of these other channels?
yeah, no question, no question. I mean, I don't think it does at all on Judy's show, but no question it does on CNN. It does on. I mean, they've all carved out their niche, and I think they're going to suffer with Biden. They're going to. I mean, I hate to say this because I'm so glad the guy's gone,
Right.
but they're going to miss. They're going to miss Trump.
But I've never been one of those people personally who has bought into this. I mean, I'll call it a myth, my word, myth of liberal bias in media. But I have to say, I have seen a bias, and I don't know that it's political, but it's certainly been a bias about what the viewers seem to want. I mean, I watch MSNBC. I agree with most of the folks on NBC more than I do with the folks on Fox, that's for sure. But, I wonder how much of it is speaking to the stories that are being told are the ones that the viewers want to watch. And how much do you think that has affected the way we have become polarized?
Well, I think it took a polarized society and it just probably exacerbated it some. But I teach a course up at the University of Pennsylvania, and each spring semester, I give them an assignment to watch a Fox show at night and an MSNBC show at night, and then report back to me the next week. And they all kind of, with glazed eyes, say it's a different universe. It's not a different world. It's a different universe. Now that's at night. I think during the day, certainly Andrea Mitchell's as good as there is in the business.
Right.
But at night it is just going for that niche.
But is it really just, I agree with you. The night times are different because they are so opinion heavy. But even during the day, isn't there a bias in the way they produce the shows and the stories they pick? I mean, it's not necessarily that they're telling lies.
Selection. No, right. Subject selection, clearly. Yeah, clearly.
I mean, I had an argument with my uncle this Thanksgiving. We have our own little tiny family bubble, so we don't see anybody outside of it, but we do we were able to get together because we've all been pretty strict. And even as a hardcore Trump conservative, he's followed the COVID rules, thankfully. But so we were able to, and we got into an argument, and he said, he's abandoned Fox now. He's on to OANN and the other places because, in his opinion, Fox has left Trump and left the party. But I think, is it that he's being told untruths, or is it that he's just not being told? Because I noticed in our conversation there were things like like judgments and rulings that were made by Trump appointed federal judges that he had not heard a thing about. And he said, well, I need to check and see if that's true. And I think, well, it's not necessarily that they've been lied to, but they've just very conveniently not been told certain things.
Well, it's both. I mean, it really is both. And again, I think all Fox is certainly not culpable. I mean, that election night, their election unit is quite good. Right. And yes, Trump went ballistic, and Jared called Rupert Murdoch to complain about the fact that they called Arizona. Guess what? Arizona voted for Biden. They were right. I mean, that wasn't done. That was done.
Of course, that's when they lost my uncle too. So,
well, exactly. So, your uncle's being told, look how left wing they are. They called Arizona for Biden. But then, if you could sit down and talk to your uncle, because we know he's a good guy and a reasonable guy, you could say, now wait a minute, Unc. Look, who carried Arizona? It was certified by the Republican governor. What's the issue here? They were right.
But you've talked to folks like him before. When you go there, so many of them now believe that even folks like Doug Ducey are after Trump or trying to are in the pocket of liberals. I mean, it's beyond. Has it not gotten beyond being able to kind of have a coherent, fact-based conversation with folks? There are some people, and listen, I could complain about liberals in the same way, but in this moment, we're going to talk about the Trump people. they look at Georgia, and it's not just the Democrats' fault. It's the Republican governor's fault for not being involved. It's the Republican Secretary of State's fault for not being involved. And I say, gosh, this is the equivalent of everyone denying Jesus Christ and you continuing to follow him despite, it's like Trump isn't that, is he? Why is this personality cult been so successful? Do you have any idea?
Well, he's been a terrible president, but he's good at it.
Okay, you got to explain that.
Well, I mean, he basically, it's Joe McCarthy. It's Father Coughlin. It's Huey Long. It's George Wallace. I mean, and he is one of the better of the demagogues. He says things over and over and over and over again. He never retracts. He never apologizes. He never explains. And it has worked for him for his whole life, and it's working now. I mean, if you say that there was fraudulent voting, dead people voted, that the Democrats stashed away hundreds of thousands of ballots, all that's demonstrably untrue. It's not just exaggerated. But if you say it over and over again, and you have some microphones to pick up on that echo chamber, then there are people that want to believe it, and they do.
Right, but Joe McCarthy was taken down by Edward Murrow, right?
Well, he was taken down by Edward R. Murrow, and he was taken down by the Senate. But how long did he reign? About 4 years.
Yeah, but who could do that? I guess my question is, that happened when Edward R. Murrow finally exposed him. It worked, and that doesn't seem to work here, does it?
Well, there's a couple things. Edward R. Murrow was one of 3 networks back then. Right, right now, if whoever the equivalent of Edward R. Murrow is today does that, they are going to go and Fox and whatever network QAnon's on, and Breitbart and a number of others will say, that's just totally, he made that stuff up. It's a lie. He's a left-wing comm simp who's out to get him. That didn't happen back then. But, as to who's going to take him down, well, I think the voters did. And what remains to be seen is, will he still have that kind of clout? Because the reason he can't stand this, Clay, you know what Donald Trump is today? He's a loser. And he hates that. He hates that. And we'll see whether the rank and file stick with him, knowing after a while when it sinks in that he's a loser.
Haven't there been times over the past 4 years that you, or that many of us expected the rank and, this is going to be the thing that makes him lose?
Oh, yeah.
And many times people have thought that was happening and it was wrong. Do you really think he's going to lose them now?
Well, I'm not sure, but I will say you're absolutely right. I mean, when Jeffrey Goldberg wrote about the awful things that he said about American veterans and dead veterans, and the earlier stuff he'd said about John McCain, and of course going back to the campaign of 2016, the awful things he bragged about, the way he assaulted women. And then Bob Woodward's book about when he said in February, yeah, I knew more, but I didn't want to tell the people, or, I didn't want to, create panic. I thought all those would be devastating. You know what? They weren't.
Why not?
And because his base is so rock solid, the reason he lost the election is because he decided in the beginning, and he probably had no choice because it's who he is, he decided in the beginning that he was going to absolutely fortify and double down on that base. And he wasn't going to reach out. And he hadn't reached out at all. And the problem for him is that base is 45, 46%, and it didn't change. Maybe it went up to 48% one month after he was not impeached. And then it went down to maybe 42 during a particularly bad time for COVID or the economy, but it basically stayed where it was, and that's where it ended up. And what I don't know is, are those people who have considered him their Moses, what are they going to think when they find out that he is a loser, he's out? Will the media pay as much attention to him? I think not. They will in Georgia this weekend, but I don't think really they're going to in February and March and April. And don't forget, Clay, he's got enormous legal problems.
But do you think that they're going to think he's a loser? I mean, don't the folks who support him, the ones who love him, the ones who will continue to go to his rallies in Georgia, even though he won't be president, don't they just believe that he won the election and it was stolen from him?
Well, there's certainly a large group of Trump supporters that believe that. and it's, I don't know what it is, but it's probably 80-90% of his supporters. I think that will diminish in time. I mean, after a while, it becomes so irrational that these aren't all a bunch of irrational people at all. Go ahead.
Well, how do these legal problems that you mentioned, what do you hope or think will happen with those? Do you think that Joe Biden should suggest that his AG not really investigate them, to leave it? Do you think he should tell him or her specifically to investigate it? What do you want to see happen?
If it were left up to me, I would investigate him. I would have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think awful things have happened. I had dinner 2 years ago with the great Bill Ruckelshaus, who passed away last year, who was the great hero of the Saturday Night Massacre in '73, an acting FBI director. And he said, "Don't forget," he said, what you know is only the surface. There's a lot of stuff below the surface. And I think there is a lot of stuff below the surface. But I think in the real world, the real politic, Joe Biden is going to really send the word to his attorney general. We don't want to get ensnared in going back and looking at all this. However, Joe Biden can do that on the federal level. He has no authority on the state and local level. And the Manhattan District Attorney, within a matter of, maybe days or weeks, there's going to be a big truck that's going to roll up before his accounting firm, and they're going to get every single document from the Trump company. And if you believe that Donald Trump was a tough but very honest businessman, he has nothing to fear. If you believe he's a guy who cut every corner he could, legal or otherwise, he's got some tough times ahead with that Manhattan District Attorney.
Listen, I don't disagree with that at all, but I still wonder if Democrats have not figured out how to tap into those same people who support Trump right now and are not handling it poorly. I mean, the Russia investigation, the impeachment, they didn't work. It didn't change their minds. So if the Manhattan District Attorney and there's a state trial in New York, and it finds irrefutable, demonstrable evidence that some law was broken, is it going to affect or change those folks' minds? And we haven't seen it work yet.
Well, I don't know that it will, but he hasn't really been before a real jury yet, has he? Remember, he refused to even testify to Robert Mueller's committee. That was part of the impeachment count that Ken Starr and Brett Kavanaugh and Lindsey Graham drew up against Bill Clinton in 1998. His refusal to fully cooperate with the special counsel. But Mueller, for reasons justified or not, let Trump off the hook. So he hasn't testified under oath. And when he goes to trial, he can, of course, take the fifth if he wants. But there's going to be documents. There's going to be lots of stuff out there. And look, if I'm Joe Biden, I'm not doing this. This is being done in Manhattan.
Right.
And it's a legitimate inquiry, and the Supreme Court has ruled that the Republican Supreme Court has ruled it's a legitimate inquiry. So I don't know what will happen if he's convicted. If he's convicted, it's going to cost him a bunch of money, and who knows? They may have to measure him for an orange jumpsuit. But I think it won't be done on the federal level. It will be done on the New York level.
And as much schadenfreude as many people will get if he were in an orange jumpsuit, what does that end up doing to his base? Does that not give people like, pulling names out, Doug Collins, Jim Jordan, Matt Gaetz, the ability to run for office with a political martyr that they're defending? I mean, Trump's name will presumably, I imagine he'll run. He'll say he's going to run so he can raise some money, but it will presumably not be on the ballot in 2024. If he's under investigation, if he's at risk of going to jail, if he's in jail, how does that affect his base's willingness to turn out for a candidate they might not have turned out for had Trump's name not been?
I don't think much. I don't think Trump's going to turn out people 4 years from now for other people. I think the Republican Party is still absolutely Trump's party. I think that will become less so, but not, he will still be a huge force. I would not look for any nominee in 2024 to disown Donald Trump. So it'll be a very delicate balancing act. But, lots more stuff is going to come out. and he has said and done things that are, how do I put it, Clay? How can I be charitable?
Who cares? Just be yourself.
That are goddamn insane.
Right? Listen, I don't disagree with that, but I do. I mean, you spent time in North Carolina. You know what it's like down here. It's right. I look around at my family. I'm one of only 2 people in my family, even extended family, who voted for Joe Biden. Most of them are.
Do you vote in North Carolina, Clay?
I do, yeah.
Well, good. I hope you voted for Roy Cooper because my son worked for him.
Well, I love me some Roy Cooper now.
All right.
I've said that many times.
All right.
But I look around at people who I know voted for Trump. Some voted for Trump and Cooper, by the way. That's why he won bigger.
Yeah,
but who voted for Trump or voted for Dan Forrest or whoever, and who are still, as you said, and are good people. They're not racists.
I agree.
They're a little bit not informed. I'm trying to be charitable myself. But they're good people. And I think about, okay, how is what the National Democrat Party is what they're talking about, what they're doing.
Well,
how
that's
is that
a
affecting
problem.
Their vote?
But let's also talk about the North Carolina party. I mean, I think Roy Cooper accepted. I think one of the reasons that Roy Cooper has been so successful, he's won 6 times on a statewide ballot, is that Roy Cooper is clearly a smart guy. He is a basic mainstream progressive, but he is not an elitist. He does not come across as an elitist, and he's not an elitist.
And he doesn't nationalize. He doesn't nationalize his races either.
Well, some races. I mean, for instance, let me give you a good example. North Carolina is one of 12 states that has not done Medicaid expansion. The people that are getting killed by that are the people in eastern North Carolina and western North Carolina, those small counties, people who live below the poverty line, more white than black, to be sure. 7 counties in North Carolina have lost their community hospitals in the last 5 years. That's largely because of the lack of Medicaid expansion. Those people are getting hurt, and Democrats have not, with the exception of Cooper, have not done an effective job of getting that across. And I mean, it's in their interest to have a Medicaid expansion. And when it's put to the voters of Oklahoma, of Missouri, 2 states that are demonstrably more conservative than North Carolina, they vote for it. So I think some
you
of
won't
it
get
is,
me to disagree with you on those issues, but what I will point out, and I'll try to keep my producers from killing me about going too local with North Carolina on this, because I'll talk to you about that all day. But,
I'd love to go to North Carolina.
But
did you go to college in North Carolina, Clay?
I did my whole life. I've spent all but about 5 years in this.
Where'd you go to?
I went to Charlotte. I went to Charlotte.
Charlotte. Good. I went to Wake Forest, so we sometimes lose to you in basketball.
So, but you look at the rest of the state races in North Carolina, and you look at those down east counties, and I'm going to try to compare those to other states in the country too, where you're right. A lot of them white working class voters are being hurt by those healthcare issues, the tax cuts that the Trump era and the Bush era, they're being hurt by those things. But if you look at the state house and state senate races in this state, they still voted Republican. And Roy Cooper won his race, but every non-incumbent Democrat, every other race where there was not an incumbent running went Republican, including our Supreme Court Chief Justice, which is very close. But these are people who nationalized the race, and they ran. These are folks who probably would have voted on issues like economic issues or healthcare issues, but they didn't, because those were not. They went to the polls to vote for Donald Trump. Robeson County showed up and has voted Democrat almost every time
until last time.
Last time and this time they were voted for Donald Trump. So what is it that Donald Trump is doing that, in my opinion, as a Democrat, is making these folks vote against their own interests, because whatever he's selling is more valuable to them than the economic issues that Democrats are selling?
He plays the us versus them card. Really, he's incredibly shrewd the way he plays that. And you know what? If you're in Robeson County, if you're one of those tribal members down there, you are the us, and the them are those people in Washington and maybe Raleigh who have never really cared about you. And what Trump has told those people and convinced those people, I think it's totally phony, is I'm with you. We're against them. But you're absolutely right. It was not only down ballot. The lieutenant governor's race stunned me.
God. Don't
I mean, there was
that.
apparently, I don't know the Democratic candidate, but apparently it was pretty good. Mike Bloomberg gave a lot of money, and the Republican candidate is a black Trumpite. I mean, it just
and openly homophobic and openly anti-Semitic, and doesn't apologize for it. I mean, trust me, we can talk about that forever. But
but it goes to your point about playing the us versus them and what Trump land, if you will, has
what
done.
Are Democrats doing wrong? Because I get what Republicans are doing, but Democrats must be doing something wrong that they can't overcome that. And what is it that they're doing wrong?
Well, on a national level, it was things like defund the police. What? No, I'm sorry. I don't know any community that wants to serve without a police department. Reform the police, change the police,
right.
Bar chokeholds, make sure officers who, violate their duty are punished. Yes, but defund the police? No.
Right. And I agree with you on that. But President Obama this week actually came out and said pretty much the same thing you just said. This is not what people should be looking to do, and that's not what they should say. And he got attacked by Ilhan Omar and Alexandria and AOC because they were upset that he was criticizing them. And they got more support than I expected when they came out against
but they still
Democrat
are
president.
A distinct minority. And what I look at is that that class of 2018, and some of whom lost this time. But you look at all those Democrats who won back then: the Abigail Spanbergers, the Colin Alrads, the Mikey Sherrills, the Jason Crows, and they all were in the Obama camp. Mm-hmm. They all were in the Biden camp. They all were in the Pelosi camp. They were not in the Omar camp. They were not in the AOC camp. And what those, what the squad and the left does, they can win in districts that are overwhelmingly Democratic. I mean, they can, and they have, and they do, and they beat incumbents sometimes there. They can't win in any district that determines which party will control the House.
So I agree with you. And I know that. But they not do sort of the same thing that Donald Trump does when he claims a win, even though it wasn't overall a win for him? Aren't AOC and Ilhan Omar going to be able to say and celebrate Cori Bush's victory over Lacey Clay and say, we are winning more seats? Isn't the squad going to expand this time? And how do people like Jim Clyburn and Abigail Spanberger convince them that their message isn't really working elsewhere when all they see is, yes, it must be because we're expanding the squad?
Well, they say, all right, the squad, instead of being, 4 or 5, will be 8 or 10, right? Mm-hmm. The trade-off is there also are going to be 10 fewer Democratic House members. Or, put it another way, 10 more Republicans. Do you want 4 or 5 more squad members and lose and add 10 more Republicans? That's a bad trade-off.
You're preaching to the choir, Al, but it's not working. But it's not working with them, and it's not necessarily working on Twitter or in the media.
But it did work in 2018. It worked for an entire national election, and they were certainly around then. But basically, they kept on point, and they kept on what mattered to people. It was about protecting the ACA and protecting people with pre-existing conditions and making sure that people had a job. I mean, those were the issues. Those are the Democratic issues. Biden did a pretty darn good job of running on that this year and really shunning the defund the police or ban fracking altogether in Pennsylvania. But it didn't sink in down ballot because, frankly, a lot of the message was dominated by the squad.
So let's look at it historically, and right. Just in the last 15 years or so, the Tea Party came about and really arguably hurt Republicans. People like John Boehner kind of became a casualty to that Tea Party sentiment. And I think myself, at least like some Democrats like me, thought, okay, well, the Tea Party is eventually going to hurt Republicans badly enough that they will have to recalibrate. And in some ways, they did. They did have to recalibrate a little bit. They had to moderate some, but, I'll be damned. They recalibrated it in a very interesting way. Is it going to take Democrats having to lose big in 22 or 24, or God forbid both, in order for Democrats to see, wait a second, this isn't working for us, running all the way to defund the police and some of these far more, I don't, are we going to have to see losses before we can fix our problems?
Well, the interesting thing is, I don't know the answer. The interesting thing, though, is that the Republicans really didn't pay a price for the Tea Party, did they?
Right. Well, they recalibrated, but they recalibrated further right?
Right. I mean, it just doesn't. I mean, I really have. I think Democrats could learn from the Tea Party, not from their policies, to be sure, but from the way they were able to go and slide off and look like they were recalibrating when they weren't. I don't think the Democratic Party is a left-wing party. It is a left-of-center party. That's where the voters are. We had a bunch of primaries, and there were a number of candidates who ran in primary after primary left of center. Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Castro, and they were clearly in the minority. Buttigieg, I consider more of a left of center than a left-wing candidate, and Klobuchar, and they did considerably better as a group, and Biden, of course, as an individual, than the left-wing Democrats like Sanders and Warren. Same thing in 2018. Look at primaries. Most primaries, the really contested primaries, are in areas that are competitive districts, are won not by the left, but by the mainstream progressives. That doesn't affect, the districts like Cori Bush's or other districts in New York. And that's the message that people ought to understand. The squad gets too much attention.
Whose fault is that?
Media.
And why are they? Is that because of the viewers seem to want that? Is that because they're lazy and they're just looking on Twitter for their sources?
Right. Good question. Some of it is that, and they make news. Look, if I go and I give a thoughtful speech, I'm a House member, and I give a thoughtful speech about how we really can change the formula for Medicaid reimbursements. How much time do you think I'm going to get on CNN or MSNBC?
Oh, none.
But if I say basically we ought to throw Donald Trump in jail tomorrow and then do away with the police department and have all social workers man those jails, how much time will I get? A lot.
Right. But so that sounds to me like, some of the things that you've said sound to me like this is just sort of what we're going to have to deal with. We can't fix it. The media is not going to all of a sudden decide to put on things that are boring because they're more reasonable. They're going to continue to do clickbait, and these websites are going to continue to only focus on the most salacious stories so that they can get clicks. So is this the new normal?
It is that is the threat if it's the new normal. Again, I go back, I hate to be a broken record, but what happened in 2018? Why did it work so well? That was an extraordinary Democratic year. And it was a year where Donald Trump had the same poll ratings he has now. The Democrats actually had less money than they did this year, but they picked up, 41 House seats. And it was almost all the Spanbergers and the Allrads. And it was not
it was AOC and it was Ilhan Omar. They also won in their district too.
She didn't pick up a seat. She kept a seat.
Right.
She retained a seat.
But in her mind, but again, you got to look at it the way she thinks about it. She thinks she got rid of a moderate Democrat because her district didn't like moderation. Her district was opposed to being moderate. Right.
She got rid of a longtime white Democrat in a district that is decidedly now minority.
Do white Democrats have are we losing white Democrats? Are they completely going to the Republican Party? Is that a fair assessment, or what's the issue there?
No, as a matter of fact, if you look what really carried this election, take your semi-neighboring state of Georgia. The black turnout was pretty good. Stacey Abrams did a good job, but we exaggerate the effect that had on Biden carrying Georgia. Biden carried Georgia because he carried Gwinnett County. He carried Cobb County, the Atlanta suburbs, the predominantly white Atlanta suburbs, college-educated women. Same thing in Pennsylvania. The margin that Biden won by was the Montgomery, Bucks, Delaware, and Chester counties voted overwhelmingly for Biden. They used to be the heart of Republican country. These are not, these are white, and it's men and women, but largely women. And the divide now, certainly race is a big divide in American politics, but another big divide is education. It's a huge divide. Didn't used to be. I ran polls for 25 years, and you always want to go when you check your poll, you want to calibrate to make sure you're right on race and geography and a couple other things. We never calibrated for education. You have to now.
Is Biden up to the task to he's been in the Senate or in government for 40 years. He has been known, certainly throughout the Obama administration, as the man who could go over to the Senate and get people to work on things that they might not have worked on with President Obama. Is he going to be able to do that when he's got problems on both his right and potentially on his left also?
Well, he certainly is going to have to thread a needle. I'm not a great optimist about the ability to do that. I think to some extent the president-elect is nostalgic for a Senate that doesn't exist anymore. And in many ways, it not only doesn't exist anymore, but if McConnell controls the calendar, he will decide what comes up or not. And I will tell you right now that if a Supreme Court justice were to retire in June, Mitch McConnell would sit on that for 3.5 years.
You think so, really?
I do. I think he's in the past. He hadn't paid any price for what he did with Merrick Garland, for what he did with Amy Barrett. He's paid no price at all. He's, remained in power.
You don't think that Joe Biden could go? I mean, certainly Joe Biden wouldn't be able to, President Biden wouldn't be able to nominate a incredibly liberal justice, but you don't think that if Stephen Breyer were to leave, that Joe Biden would be able to convince McConnell that there was a moderate type of jurist that he could put in that seat?
I think it'd be a tough sell. Which is why I don't think that the Senate that Joe Biden was used to working with as recently as 12 years ago is the same as today. McConnell cares about his caucus, and his caucus is more right-wing than it was before. Sure, you have Collins and you have Murkowski, but that's about all. I mean, I look at people like Rob Portman, a really smart, good guy. He is absolutely gone in the tank. He put his his public integrity in a blind trust for the last 4 years.
What is he thinking? Because he's up for re-election in 2 years. Does he think that this is going to help him?
I think he thinks it would hurt him if he didn't. Yeah,
he thinks that he would losing Trump's support in Wisconsin would hurt him more
in Ohio. In Ohio, yes.
Oh, Rob Portman. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Ron Johnson. That's the one who's lost his mind.
He's just a nutbag. He's just crazy.
Ron Johnson is up in 2 years. I don't think Rob Portman is. So yeah,
I think he is, as a matter of fact. And Rob Portman is a smart guy with a really distinguished public record. OMB director, trade representative, very close to the Bush family. A constructive conservative senator, and he's just absolutely. I mean, they nominated this woman for the Federal Reserve Board, Judy Shelton. She's not going to make it, but Rob Portman, who knows economics and knows this was an unqualified nominee, voted for her. It's fear, Clay. It's just fear.
Biden's put up some pretty unexciting, to some folks, but certainly non-controversial for the most part, people for his cabinet thus far. Janet Yellen at Treasury, Tony Blinken at State, names Tony Blinken that I think most people didn't even know. And he hasn't, with the exception of one perhaps, he's not really gotten much pushback at all publicly for any of the nominations he's had thus far. Is that a sign that he's trying to tread lightly, or is it a sign that Republicans just aren't interested in picking the fights yet? Do you think he's going to have trouble with those top level folks that he's nominated thus far?
What normally happens is that the opposition party picks one or two nominees to go after. Either party does it, or both parties do it, and so they're that, and you'll add a couple this time. Before he even, Senator Hawley and Senator Rubio and Senator Cotton put out a press release I think within seconds after Tony Blinken was named, all they had to do with that press release was fill in the blanks, fill in the name. So, I think
well,
there's
these
some
are
of
all
that.
people running for president in 2024,
It
right?
is. And I think some of that is that. Some of it is, any Republican going to look at me with a straight face and say Janet Yellen is not qualified to be Secretary of the Treasury? That she doesn't meet the lofty standards of Steve Mnuchin. I mean, is any Republican really going to look me in the eye and say that? So I think there will be some. He may lose one or two. But
do you think
the
he puts
appointments have
them
been
up
pretty good?
when you're sitting in the politics war room with James Carville? Do you sit there and think, if I am filling out this cabinet, do you think he throws in some folks specifically who he knows will grab that type of ire? Are there sacrificial lambs that get put up there specifically?
No.
You don't think so?
No. Lyndon Johnson said, once they beat you, you never stop bleeding. Not quite true, but it's a loss, and you have to expend a lot of capital. And if he has a nominee that he has to spend a lot of capital on to get through 51-49 or whatever, he better be certain that this is someone that really is worth it. If I had been Joe Biden, would not have nominated Neera Tanden to be OMB director, and I think she's a very talented woman. But you knew there was going to be a kind of confirmation fight. I'm not sure he can win it. And if he does win it, he will use a lot of chits. And I'm not sure it wouldn't have been better to tap her for something like domestic policy chief. I mean, she's very, very, very smart, very talented, but I'm just not sure that's worth that fight.
It's not a strategy to take attention away from somebody else then. I mean, it would be very generous of someone like Neera Tanden to be willing to be that sacrificial lamb, obviously.
I know Neera Tanden, let me tell you, that's not what she's thinking right now.
Okay. Is his bigger problem, is he going to have a bigger problem with Mitch McConnell, you think, than he is with the left wing of the party in the House?
Yes, there will be a problem with the left wing in the House, but there's no one who's better able to deal with that than Nancy Pelosi. She will go, and she's got probably a majority of 5. And just as a quick aside, he cannot afford to appoint he being Joe Biden, any more House members to any position.
Right.
Because you can't lose those votes. And it's always about 60 days between someone leaving and having a special election. And I don't care how safe a district it is, you can't afford to lose those votes during those 60 days. So I think Pelosi, it'll be very, very delicate, but my guess is she's going to win a couple, 219 to 215 votes.
Right, but if the squad is 10 people, 9 to 10 people large.
She's got to pick a couple off.
And with whatever strategies she uses for that.
Right. Well, she got to pick a couple off without losing the Spanbergers and, some of the others.
A few crazy, wild questions, just because you know this and I don't, and I'm curious. Is there any chance, any attraction for someone like Pat Toomey to be offered a plum spot in the administration that he might take? I mean, do you think that's something that Biden's thinking through? Find one of these red state, one of these blue state senators, a Republican who has a Democrat governor, and take Pat Toomey out and let the governor of Pennsylvania appoint the replacement?
I think the Republicans would go ballistic, and they would bring pressure on Toomey not to do that, number one. Number two, I don't think Pat Toomey would fit in a Biden administration. He really wouldn't. There was a time there in 2009.
But if he's retiring anyway.
Well, but I don't think he ideologically fits, philosophically fits, governmentally fits. I mean, he is a bona fide conservative. This is not going to be a conservative administration. They may have to lean more to the right than they'd like to on some things. But I remember 2009 or late 2008, Barack Obama seriously considered Judd Gregg for Secretary of Commerce. Judd Gregg is a very smart fellow, but he's very conservative. He would not have fit in the Obama administration. It would have. It works for some people. I mean, it can work for Ray LaHood, who was really a mainstream moderate Republican. But I don't think you're going to see that scenario.
How careful does a Mitch McConnell have to be to not put off someone like Susan Collins to the point that she goes independent and caucuses with the Dems?
Well, if it's 51-49, it's more of a threat than 52-48, isn't it?
Right, but do you think
So
she could do that? I mean, she just won 6 more years in a state where that's clearly trending blue. Assuming she wants to run again, arguably it might be even bluer then. Would she? I mean, and her fellow senator is also an independent, right? Angus King.
right.
So is that a possibility? Could she say, I can't do this anymore?
She's been a pretty strong McConnell ally. When McConnell has needed her, she's voted with him, with one or two exceptions. And so I don't see that happening at all. I really don't. Look, I mean, the whole Senate. I mean, part of the Senate is who controls the agenda. What you put on the floor, what you don't. And that's why the Georgia Senate races are so important. And Joe Biden has more at stake in Georgia in a month than most everything else.
Right, but if he were to win, if Democrats were to win one, Republicans win the other, that would put the House at 51-49, and arguably someone like a Susan Collins would be in a pretty strong position to do something like that if she felt like Mitch McConnell was blocking too much, too many things that she thought should go through, right?
Well, 51-49 certainly brings more pressure on Mitch McConnell. I consider I would be shocked if Susan Collins ever left caucus the way Senator Jim Jeffords did years ago. I think or Arlen Specter did. I just think that's not going to happen. But certainly 51-49 brings more pressure on him than 52-48.
You think that's a chance down there? Do you think the Democrats have any chance in Georgia?
Yes, I think they do, but I think it's going to be a unanimous decision one way or the other.
Oh, really? It won't split?
I think it's a split verdict is very likely. The Democrats are running as a ticket. The Republicans are running as a ticket. And,
you don't think there are voters who would like to just say, you know what, I'm not partisan, so I'm going to vote for one in each party? I mean, it's very rare that they get a chance to send two people to the Senate at the same time. So,
well, there may well be, but I think, to the extent there's some that want to do Warnock and Ossoff, there will be others. These are all small groups too, that would decide that they're going to do, where I said Ossoff and Warnock, I meant Ossoff and Loeffler. Others will do Warnock and Perdue. I think it's going to be a really small group. I mean, look, if it's a 50.2 to 49.8, yeah, it may be. But if it's not that, I suspect one party is going to elect two senators from Georgia on January 5th.
Is it interesting to you that, I mean, Trump didn't say a thing about the Georgia Senate race until just this past week?
He doesn't care.
Right.
He doesn't care.
But this potential for a boycott, I think there are certain people on Parler, and I guess it's gotten quite a bit of steam, people who are saying, write in Trump's name in the Senate races, don't show up, this is rigged. Do you think that's going to have any impact at all?
I doubt it, but I don't know. I haven't been down there. And what this goes to, it's not so much whether they're going to be people who show up and write in Trump's name, but what happens in those. He's going to Valdosta on Saturday. What happens to those Trump voters in Valdosta? Are they going to turn out? They turn out for Trump, and if he won the ballot January 5th, they turn out for him again. Will they turn out for David Perdue? I mean, some of them consider Trump, as I said earlier, one of their own. I mean, he's one of our guys. He's a populist. Do they want to really turn out for this guy who engaged in thousands of stock trades while he was a senator?
Well, if Trump tells him that he didn't, then maybe they will. But I mean, it'll be interesting to see who shows up to the rally for someone who clearly lost the state. And even those who turn up to the rally, how many will show up on January 5th will be interesting.
Yeah.
Got a few quickfire questions for you. Quickfire round. Should we be hearing more from Biden in the face of Trump's election claims? Has he stayed too quiet?
No, he's handling it just right.
Well, I told you quickfire, so I want to ask you to elaborate. Is it more important to hold the Trump administration accountable or to correct course swiftly?
Well, for Biden, probably the latter. For the country overall, the former has to be on the agenda. I mean, you can't have a lack of accountability.
Will the Trumps continue to be a viable force in politics?
Really interesting question. I think less so than most people believe today.
You don't think he's going to try to start a news network or continue his rallies?
Let me tell you something. If it comes to Donald Trump's news network versus Rupert Murdoch, I know where I'm betting.
On Rupert Murdoch?
Yes.
Okay. Are Democrats still the party of the blue-collar worker?
Not nearly enough. They went and Joe Biden was the perfect blue-collar candidate, right? And if you look at a place like Pennsylvania, state where he was born, he did slightly better than Hillary Clinton in those northeastern and those western counties, but not much. He carried Pennsylvania again because of the college-educated suburbs.
Is it too late to shield our country's workers from automation?
Boy, thank God this is a lightning round, because you will probably exhaust my knowledge in about 4.7 seconds. It's both inevitable. Automation is both inevitable, and there's going to be a tremendous, a premium on figuring out how we work around it. But something, we always work around it. I remember when I graduated from high school many, many years ago, we went over to a friend's house, and his father was a very conservative businessman. And this was back in I show my age now, 1960. And he said, let me tell you something. You kids have no future because labor unions are taking over America, and America will never be the prosperous country it's been for the last 15 years. Yeah, sure. Thanks. So we'll figure out a workaround. We'll figure out, a new way. I'm not confident. I'm worried about the short term, but not the long term.
If the House and Senate end up split, who should we look to for compromise?
Well, you see it already. You
suspects.
See the Mansions and the Collins, right? And, Mitt Romney will be involved in some of this. And, it's going to be difficult. If they end up split, if Georgia goes with two Republicans, it's going to be a real challenge for Joe Biden.
Okay, so we'll pull out of this lightning round because I have when I opened the show, I talked a little bit about Capital Gang and about the days as I was prepping for today's episode. I was kind of looking back at shows like Capital Gang, shows like your show with Robert Novak, and looking at how through the 80s and the 90s, and even a little bit into the early part of 2000s. There were a lot more shows on cable news that had people on both sides of the aisle talking about issues, arguing about them. I mean, you got into plenty of fights with Robert Novak on TV, but presumably, at least you convinced us, you didn't hate each other, and you were able to disagree vehemently.
I'll go much further than that. I miss him, all the time. So we didn't agree on anything. We didn't agree on politics, taxes, politicians, basketball, the weather, but God, we had a great time together. And I learned from him, and he may have had a hard time admitting it, but he may have learned one or two things from me.
A few things, but you could see that on TV, that even when people disagreed, they were able to get along and laugh at the end of an episode and still be friends. And that happened throughout the 90s and early into the 2000s. Capital Gang and Crossfire went away at the same time. Around about the same time, by the way, that Hannity and Combs were no longer together, and it just became Hannity instead. Then CNN tried to bring back Crossfire in the mid-teens, and it didn't last but for 10 minutes. And I can't help but wonder if that was sort of the period of time when people stopped being willing to listen to folks get along. Have we, and even you now do, as we've talked about, you have a show, a podcast here with James Carville, who really needs no introduction either. Politics War Room with James Carville and Al Hunt. If you're listening and you haven't listened to that, I really recommend it. But even shows like that, or this one, where we had intended to do a show with people from both sides of the aisle trying to have thoughtful discussion, even we had to kind of distance ourselves from that because we found that there were not many times when we could get a Republican and a Democrat to come on together one-on-one and have a discussion. You do your show with James, who's obviously shares a lot of, you disagree on some things, but you share a lot of the same viewpoints. Right. Why aren't we doing that? Why aren't people willing to sit down and talk to each other anymore?
Well, I mean, I think I'm going to be parochial here. I think that my wife's show, the PBS NewsHour, certainly does that.
Right.
But I think that the commercial
But not for ratings.
No, that's right. And I think what cable news has found is that basically you go and you play to your audience. And when you play to your audience, you don't worry about having the other side told. And now occasionally they'll tell the other side, but it's just a whole different political, cultural and social landscape than it was 20 years ago.
I mean, even on MSNBC and Fox, who I think to their credit, both of them have sort of slyly admitted that they are biased to the left or the right to some degree. But I've noticed that even on Fox, the liberal contributors that they have either tend to be pretty moderate already or tend to be almost comical. And the conservative commentators on MSNBC tend to be either pretty moderate and anti-Trump, or they tend to be so ridiculous that they can't be taken seriously. I mean, there's just not a forum for that sort of thoughtful, cerebral almost. Capital Gang was pretty cerebral, I'd say, for that sort of discussion.
It was certainly interesting and engaging. Cerebral, I don't know, but
y'all were definitely smarter than everybody at home watching. I can tell you that.
It was a lot of fun, I'll tell you that.
But is it just, are we done with that? Is it over? Is it just, should we just figure out how to live in our silos and accept it? Or better yet, how the heck are we going to get along?
I don't have a very good answer to that, Clay. I wish I did. I wish.
Don't worry about it. Nobody else has either.
No, I could wish at my advanced age, I could say I have a way. There's a way to turn this around. I will say this: if having Joe Biden as president doesn't do it, I don't know what the hell will.
Right.
Because if there's anybody, I mean, Joe Biden is a guy who spoke at Strom Thurmond's funeral. And
got attacked from the left because of it, right?
Yeah, that's right. But, and is attacked from the right every day. Mm-hmm. And so, if he can't do it, then I don't know who can.
Well, having done this for almost 10 months now, I don't have the answer to that question. But I do think that part of the answer is that we have to want to. And I worry now the question becomes, how do we get people to want to get along? Because I don't think when you look on Twitter, when you look at the types of things that people get upset over, I can't help but, and God, it makes me feel old to say it, but I can't help but find myself seeing people getting upset over things that I think, that's just not a battle worth picking. Yeah. That's not something. And I think that there's not necessarily a strong desire to want to get along. There's not a strong desire from Mitch McConnell to accept someone like Merrick Garland, who is far more moderate than someone like Sonia Sotomayor, who Barack Obama had nominated two spots previously. So I think we have to want it, and I'm not sure that I have found too many signs of people wanting it.
No, I know. I think you're right. I do think you're right. We're going to make it, Clay. So, let me ask you, because I know we have to go. Let me ask you this. Where are you from in North Carolina?
I'm from Raleigh.
I love the state. My son's living in Raleigh now.
Oh yeah,
and just
now,
loves it.
Does he work for the government?
Well, the campaign ended.
The campaign, right? So we work on the campaign.
So he's looking now. I don't want to advertise for him, but he's looking now. But he went down there over the summer and just fell in love with He fell in love with Raleigh, and it's interesting because it was an unusual experience with social distancing. He didn't have the kind of experience that you would normally have, particularly in a campaign. Of being with people all the time, but it just was. It's a good town. It's a really good town.
It is, and we like to keep it a secret because people keep coming here.
I won't say another word.
Don't say anything, but I'll say he's got a good boss. Roy Cooper is one of the best in my opinion. He does the policy correctly, and he doesn't go for the flash and the argument. At times he can be boring, but in a way, that's what I like about him. He does the job.
Yeah, no, he does the job. Hey, I have enjoyed this. And
have I.
I can't thank you enough. And
thank you.
Best of luck. And we'll figure out how we're going to make this world work soon, Clay. We really will.
I have faith. I believe it. I hope you're right. Al Hunt, thank you so much.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
If you don't already listen to Al's podcast with James Carville, it's a Politicon podcast, Politics War Room with James Carville and Al Hunt. You can catch that every single week in the same place that you find this podcast, too. If you like ours, please subscribe, like, comment, tell your friends about it, and do the same thing with Al's podcast. Again, Politics War Room with James Carville and Al Hunt. And we'll be back next week with another episode of How the Heck Are We Gonna Get Along?